Welcome to the Layer by Layer Poetic Features for Psalm 13. Our goal is to reveal the distinctive beauty and power of the original text of Psalm 13 as the next best thing to knowing Hebrew yourself. Our three features are questions and answers, prayer changes everything, and closer and closer to the Lord. We'll look first at questions and answers. Psalm 13 opens with a five-fold repeated cry, "How long, Lord? How long must all this continue?" There is no explicit answer as to how long, but there is a poetic answer in the second half of the psalm, as the sounds of the questions are replayed. The most common way to ask how long in Hebrew is ad matai. When less common forms are used, it is often for phonological resonance, because Hebrew poetry regularly indulges in sound play. The form chosen here, ad ana, used 4 times in succession, sounds very similar to va'ani in verse 6, but I. In Hebrew, this but I signals a shift in the discourse. The shift here is from how David was thinking before, in verses 2 to 5, to how David was thinking after in verse 6. The implication is that the answer to how long is not a matter of timing changing, but a matter of the psalmist changing. He has a different perspective by the end of the psalm. This kind of phonological answering occurs at least 2 more times in this psalm. In verse 3, David asks how long he must make plans to no avail. Ashith, for will I make. In verse 4, he fears lest he sleep in death. Ishan, for I sleep. But in verse 6, he sings to the Lord. Ashira, I will sing. The repetition of the E and sh sounds reinforces the theme, from perceived futility to fear of death to singing praise. In verse 3, David asks how long sorrow will be in his heart. Yagon bilvavi. In verse 5, his adversaries might rejoice. Yagilu. But in verse 6, his heart rejoices. Yagea libi. Once again, the sound repetition reinforces the theme, from sorrow to fear of enemies rejoicing, to at the end, his own rejoicing. As each set of sounds is reinforced, the questions are not so much answered as put to rest. The lament did not give way to a remedial plan, but rather to trust and rejoicing. Let's now look at our second poetic feature. Prayer changes everything. Chiasms are a favorite device in Hebrew poetry to draw attention to a particular theme. In Psalm 13, the subject of the main verbs creates a chiastic pattern that centers on the prayer of verse 4. That prayer is literally the turning point of the pattern, representing that prayer changes everything. In verses 2 and 6, the Lord is the subject of the verbs, ignoring, hiding, recompensing. Within that, in verses 3 and 6, the psalmist is the subject, making plans, trusting, and rejoicing. In verses 3 and 5, the enemies are the subject, being exalted, speaking, or rejoicing. In the center of all these, the psalmist cries out to God, "Consider! Answer me, Lord my God! Give light to my eyes, lest I sleep in death." The poem does not mention the enemies being defeated, nor the Lord appearing in glory. The poetic centerpiece is simply the psalmist, David, praying to God. As so often in the Psalms, the plea for help is itself the turning point, which leads to trust, confidence, and peace. This chiasm does not provide the structure of the psalm. Structurally, verse 5 provides more grounding for the prayer. The chiasm of participants merely draws attention to verse 4 itself, highlighting it as central to the message of the poem. The opening lament, asking how long the Lord will ignore David, seems at first to give the opposite message. David's pleas did not accomplish anything, at least at first. The poem does not address timing directly, leaving that to the audience to ponder. David may have felt as if the Lord were ignoring him, but prayer was still what ended up making all the difference. We'll have to turn to our third poetic feature to find any resolution. So now we turn to Closer and Closer to the Lord. The 3 strophes of the poem progressively decrease in length, from 5 lines to 4 lines to 3 lines. This mirrors the distance between the psalmist and the Lord, which is progressively becoming less and less. The psalm opens, as we know, with the heart-rending plea, "How long, Lord?" It is repeated explicitly 3 times, and once it is implied, making the first strophe 5 lines, all asking a variation on the same question. The next strophe, in which the psalmist prays, is 4 lines in length. The last strophe, signaled by the shift "but I," is only 3 lines. In Hebrew poetry, such a regular progression would be iconic of the message in some way. In this psalm, the meaning is that the distance between the psalmist and the Lord is getting shorter and shorter. He's becoming closer and closer to the Lord. Combined with the previous features, the message becomes that prayer makes all the difference. Sometimes that means prayer changes not the circumstances, but the psalmist, drawing him closer and closer to the Lord. It does not happen instantaneously, but progressively over time. This has been the Poetic Features video for Psalm 13, in which we explore the natively Hebrew poetic nature of the psalm. Our overview video provides a coherent interpretation of the psalm, and our exegetical issues video discusses other scholarly views. All these videos are offered free of charge thanks to the generosity of our donors. Please visit us at cdbr.org to learn more. Thank you.